So God's design from an engineering perspective. An outline of what I've planned to share and speak about today is this is an opener, kind of a description about what's going to be talked about, a little bit about me, some quotes, and then an opener just to get everyone thinking about, from a design perspective, how we would design things. And then getting more into engineering design and then touching on a number of different topics. So I don't come to you as an expert. I come to you as someone that's experienced life in engineering, as a Christian, and in education. So the description, you can read about it. That I think most of you read about it, but this is going to talk about, from an engineer perspective, of there's design, there's building, there's testing, and how that connects to who God is, what He does, to the engineering profession, then how He's created us personally in that design, build, test, and model and expectation. So a little bit about me. There was a little blurb in the advertisement, but my whole life has been mainly about engineering, ministry, and education. So engineering-wise, I got my undergrad and master's from the University of Missouri in Columbia in electrical engineering, and then my doctorates from University of South Florida in Tampa, and it was in the early 90s. And my focus was on semiconductors, so did some things in that area. Throughout, I was always involved in education and getting more young people involved in engineering. And then in the late 90s, while I was raised in the church, in a denominational church, and then in late college and grad school, I had a total dark, prodigal few years in life, and then in 98, recommitted my life to the Lord. From there, education and ministry became a big part of what was happening as well. So ministry-wise, been involved in lots of different ministries throughout the years. Been here in Austin since 1997. And one ministry I'll mention now is currently part of the leadership of the UT faculty and staff Christian network here at UT's campus. But just various ways here on campus and in the city. And then family and sports. My wife and I have been married 20 years, have a 17-year-old son and a 12-year-old daughter. And soccer is one of my favorite sports, and so I'm enjoying the games. Missing one right now, but I'll catch who wins later. So, to get us thinking, some quotes from scientists of faith, just to get our mindsets and thoughts there. So, George Washington Carver was an agricultural scientist and inventor. I love to think of nature as an unlimited broadcasting station through which God speaks to us every hour if we will only tune in. Albert Einstein, we should take care not to make the intellect our God. It has, of course, powerful muscles, but has no personality. Michael Faraday, his study in electromagnetism. The book of nature, which we have to read, is written by the fingers of God. And two there from Isaac Newton. Gravity explains the motions of the planets, but it cannot explain who sets the planets in motion. I think that's one of my favorites. And there's a scripture that's I'll talk about later, that oftentimes as humans we're very tempted to worship the creation rather than the creator. As an opener, there's different, from engineering to design process, there's different organizations and groups that have a certain design process, but all of them have, first you start thinking about what you're going to do, then you plan or design, and then you build, create, make, whatever the verb is, and then you test to make sure that is what you intended it for, and then you go through a process where you redo that, you reiterate until you, depending on your limits of time, money, effort, people, resources, you continue to go through until it's time for production. So just as a question, if someone here was to design a shoe, what would you consider in that design process, design, build, test process? If you were going to design a shoe, we all have shoes on now, the different types and forms. I'll take a few answers and then we'll continue. Yes?
Size and shape of feet.
Size and shape of feet. So you have a foot, you have a shoe, so you have a foot that's already existing, so you're making a shoe to complement what's already there as the foot. Yes? Purpose?
Running, whatever.
Yeah. So whether you're going to run in the shoe, whether you're going to be in the rain, whether you're going to be on like rough terrain in the desert. So the purpose of the shoe, and then some shoes claim to be multi-purpose, but then, I mean, all shoes have limitations because we're humans. We design and create with limitations. We're limited. God is not. And those are good answers. So designing a shoe. If you were going to design an animal, would that be different? Would you still think about purpose? Still think about, what environment it's going to be in? And then if we thought about the universe, and that's a lot larger type of question, but again, it's thinking about purpose. So establishing thoughts and foundation that God is creator. Elohim is God, the mighty creator. And just some scriptures that point to his greatness of being a creator. So Genesis 1:1, that in the beginning, that God created the heavens and the earth. And then in 1:2, talking about, it was mentioned that for the shoe, that you have the foot, but then you're making the shoe fit around the foot, that there was nothing, and then God went from nothing to something, from void to creation. As engineers, we have nothing. We kind of may have a blank sheet of paper or a blank computer for a computer-aided design, and then we design something, and then from there we create. So God goes from nothing to something. We have more processes there because we're limited. God created mankind, created us in his image, and that he laid the foundation of everything. He's the scripture I mentioned earlier about sometimes exchanging God's truth for a lie and then worshiping the created thing rather than the creator. So I think that's, as humans, with our desire for pride and self-sufficiency and wanting to be our own entities, that's a black hole that we can get sucked into. When I consider the heavens, the work of God's fingers, that his works are from his fingers, from what he's done. The wonders that you've done, the things that you planned for us, that not only for the world, but for us personally, that he has plans for us, that it's not a mistake that in this particular generation, this particular time, this particular country, the particular family that God put you in, the particular, the parents, no matter what the parents thought about what was happening, God had a plan for you, that none of us are a mistake, and that in time, that there's purposes, the purpose that he has for you will come to pass. And even one thing that's on my heart right now to share is that often God, and I'll cover in some of the scriptures later, that there's a need, and then he'll create a solution for that need. And so I would like for you to consider the various solutions to needs that God has used you for, that he's possibly calling you to use you for currently, and to be open for what you're still here, he's still giving you your breath to have purpose in you, what he wants to use you for in the future. All things were made through him. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. And then a few more, just talking about his works, his creation, the creation of the world, and just some thoughts here from those various scriptures. One is that God creates without and within his system. So from within the system, without the system, from void, he created the earth. From within the system, there's seed, there's trees, there's seed-bearing fruit after his own kind. So within the system, he's still the masterful creator. Created the universe from nothing. He created the universe from nothing. He created us as man from his creation of the earth, from dust. So that's another that he creates also from within his system. Being fruitful and multiplying, that within his system, we continue to, as humans, to multiply, and we can't do it on our own. But within his system, God is the one that is doing that. And so for we have to go from a blank sheet to design, plan, then to create. And then also mentioning the difference between creation and sort of making, that if you create something, then it's can be done from nothing, and God is the one that creates. We make things from what's already available to us, from the elements, from various elements that are here on earth. And we make and build, and we model God's greatness. We're made in his image, and so we do have a desire to want to create, to make, to be creative, to be inventive. And so that desire is implanted in us from God, just as there's what God implants in all of his creatures to be able to live, to be able to continue to protect itself, animals, trees, flowers, and so all of that got within God's creation, that it's there. Okay. One thing, just to mention that as I was going through and preparing for this particular talk, I had a foundation of what I've been going through over the years, but then there was some things that really stood out to me that I added to this. And I'll say that for me over the years that I taught engineering at UT. I'm currently at UT, been here for 4 years as an engineering scientist. About 20 years ago, I was here for 5 years as a education program manager and also a instructor engineering at the College of Electrical Engineering, math education, and science education. And through all of that, also had a 10-year stint in the public school system of teaching engineering. And so from all of those, in teaching engineering, the process, from folks that are from elementary school through those that are professionals currently teaching, preparing those for their fundamental engineering exam. So I teach some of those courses to be able to prepare folks to pass their professional engineering exam. That through all that God is the ultimate creator, and anything that is taught in engineering over the years, God has given me just more and more of an insight of that it's all from him, and to see him in all that I do. And also, I encourage you that no matter what your profession is, some of you, I believe, are already doing this, but I encourage you to seek to find God in your profession. As to, okay, God, why did you give me this desire to be in this profession? What are you calling me to do in this profession? What am I called to do while I'm here? Where are your fingerprints in this profession? How am I to make a difference in this profession that you've called me to? So and whether you have a 9-to-5 or you are retired, there's still something that God's called you to do, as long as you have breath that he's giving you for the life that he's giving you. So for light, God said, let there be light, and there was light. There's this interesting fact that there's this flower, Venus flower basket sponge, that is, we deal with fiber optics a lot in engineering, and so, but there's a plant that God created that is more than what we could do with our technology. So it's 3,000 feet below the sea level. It grows its own optic fiber filaments. The filaments are thinner than what we can make ourselves. it's manufactured at temperatures lower than what we can manufacture. And it can bend and not break to where our fiber optics cables are very sensitive. So throughout, I'll just give examples to just kind of have us continue to think and marinate about how great God's creation is and how we mimic it. Sometimes we find something and then we discover something, and then from that discovery, we find that, wow, God already had that in his earth that he created. And sometimes from that creation, we see, wow, this is great. How can we try to mimic what's there to promote and help mankind? So design, build, and test. So in engineering, whenever we're doing something in the process of engineering, there's resources and there's limits. And so we don't have a limited amount of time. We don't have unlimited time. We don't have unlimited money. We don't have unlimited people resources. There's always constraints. And for those constraints, that when God created the earth, that there was with constraints. So from Job here, that he marked off dimensions, that he fixed limits, that God set limits as to how far the waters would come and not go. He set limits as to how fast the earth would spin and not spin, and how it would rotate. All those are limits that he has set as dimensions. And then it's being designed for a purpose for us, that we have limits, but he has plans for us. There was plans for the earth. There's plans for us individually. Before he calls us into existence, that he knows us. He sets us apart for particular purposes that he calls us for in our lives. He designs us so intricately that he knows the numbers of hairs on our heads. And as life changes, sometimes it gets less, sometimes it gets more, but he knows the numbers of hairs on our head. And again, it's all purposed. He knows. He's the creator of it all. And then for designing, that he designed the earth and the system, the people, and the system that we interact with. Even thinking about the wonders of language and how he's given us the way to be able to make sounds and then make an eardrum to be able to hear it, and a brain to be able to translate. And then even throughout time, whether it's before the Tower of Babel or after the Tower of Babel, or even currently, some folks are gifted to be able to learn multiple languages. Sometimes for some it's difficult to learn one or two, but even that gift of language, that there's various systems that he's developed that we take for granted. I believe that a lot of us take for granted daily, that something to give him praise and honor and glory for, saying, wow, God, you gave us the gift of speech, the gift of hearing. We can smell, we can sense your creation. We can see the marvelous colors that you created within the earth, because he's created the earth and he creates us to be able to fit within it, just like the foot in the shoe example earlier, to be able to admire and to enjoy and hopefully focus that he's given praise and honor for being the creator of it all. And then the concept of, that no shrub had yet, in Genesis 2:5, that no shrub had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no one to work the ground. So until there was ground to work, there was no need to have an Adam or an Eve to be a part of what's happening. There was no need, before Adam and Eve were even created, that there needed to be a place for provision, that when Adam and Eve was created, that it would provide food for them and shelter and an environment for them. So just that whole design, I'll may talk about it more detail later, but even when designing, let's say designing this building, that you have structural engineers, you have architectural engineers, have to decide, okay, what's this building going to be used for? How many people are going to be in this building? What's going to be the heating, cooling needs for this building? How much heat does an average person give off to where you have to set the heating and cooling at a certain level? How much weight would the floor have to hold if you're going to have something heavy there? What would the walls need to be made of? There's lots of things to be designed for, to be thought about. So before even people are in this building using the space, there had to be a design process of what that's going to be. God did that with the earth before he put us here. He does that with us before he puts us in a particular generation or a particular time within his glorious creation. Throughout, I may talk about a couple of my experiences throughout of my, I guess, interactions with thoughts of God and design process and build process and test process from various interactions I've had over the years, various jobs and tasks that I've had. So for design and grad school, I was focusing on the semiconductor field. So it was defect engineering. And it was, to me, it was very, I'd say the word is awesome that for defect engineering, you had silicon wafers that you made integrated circuits from, and my focus was on the wafer to see at an atomic level how much impurities are in there, because if you have too much different types of metals and you have the device get smaller and smaller, then those other atoms of metallic atoms in there could short circuit part of what's happening. When things are larger, you can have a certain amount of impurities in there, but as it gets smaller, then it makes more of a difference. And in that, seeing just how, on an atomic level, just how perfectly the lattices are within a particular metal, and that has to have a designer, that has to have something that's there. And then even we as engineers, we focus on manipulating what's in a good way, of managing in a good way of what is already created. So even for electricity is always, when God created the earth, electricity was there, but then we developed devices like for integrated circuits or packages or transistors of how to manage how many electrons flow at any particular time. Even for the lights, the amount of voltage and current that's being used for them, that it's a limit to it. You just can't have unlimited current, because then things can burn up and things can have issues. If you don't have enough, then nothing will light. But there's a particular way that we control, to an extent, what's happening with those electrons. And then whether you have smaller devices, you have electrons, and then the opposite of electrons are holes, and you have protons and neutrons, and you have, on a small level, all these elements. And so we focus on managing that as created in God's image. He created everything, and we get the joy of managing and manipulating and using for the betterment of the world and us as individuals, what's been already created. And I would say that going through the design, build, and test, and the focus of that was about 20 years ago, I was involved in a lot of education outreaches for middle school and high school students that dealt with engineering, getting more young people involved in engineering with hands-on projects that you can teach math and engineering concepts from. And so there was a Master Builder Pledge that 20 years ago that my wife and I feel that God gave us was, I am designed for a purpose, I am built for greatness, I am tested for completeness, I am wonderfully made. So that God designs us for a purpose, that he builds us for greatness, that we are tested for completeness, and that we are wonderfully made, because he made us and we're his. And so in that, sort of this chunk of this presentation is looking at the design part, the built part for greatness, the being tested for completeness and being wonderfully made. And so for the built for greatness, Everyone who's called on God's name for His glory, for He formed and made. So, and we mentioned earlier that He's made all things are made for Him, through Him. And so, building being built for creation, so we were made for Him. And again, the examples of the environment being created first. Two other examples. When I was working with high school students for engineering, I was also teaching robotics. And so within robotics, there were these competitions. Within these competitions, you create robots that either went fast and had to shoot balls into hoops and put things here, take things from there. But whenever, for the year, the project was given to the students, or given to the team, the environment was already created. That you had the playing field that's going to be this dimensions. This is what's going to be needed to be able to succeed. There are going to be rules there. And God creates the earth, He creates us, He gives us a book of instructions as to how best to live our lives in the Bible, and that all that is Him creating the environment first, and then saying these are the rules. And in that competition, if someone breaks the rules, there's penalties. And same thing for us that I know during I call them my prodigal son years of I did things that were outside of what God had intended for me, and I had consequences. For a while, I didn't care, and then after a while, it's like I started caring, and then I had to submit. I had to not say, okay, God, I want you to bless what I'm doing. I had to submit and say, God, what do you have for me? I'm yours. And for me, that was a big turning point. A big turning point for afterwards. Life has been not like roses and it's great, but it's been graced with Him and been enjoyable. But it was a turning point that I didn't even realize how much of me was resisting of totally submitting to Him. And so I wasn't aware, because it's like, well, everyone wants to do what they want to do. And then even in the Christian circles I was around, it was like, okay, God, bless what I want. This is what I want. I want you to do this for me. And even there's a scripture that comes to mind right now is that God will give us the desires of our heart. And for me, I saw that initially of, okay, whatever my heart desires, I want it. Whether it's good for me or bad for me, God, you're going to give it to me because I desire it. And God gave me a different level, a different revelation of that, is that if I'm seeking Him and I'm submitted to God, that God will take a desire that He had for me before He even made me. He'll put that desire in my heart. I'll listen to what He's saying to me in my heart, and He'll bring that desire to pass. And it'll bless me, it'll bless those that are around me, and it'll bless my generation by putting Him in that process of the desire comes from Him, not just from me because something I saw or something that I want or however that goes. And I will also share now too that I've been serving as an associate pastor at a local church here for many years, and oftentimes as I share about anything, during that time as I'm talking, God downloads things to me that I hadn't thought about before, and they come out, and I go, wow, God, that's good. So as I'm talking through here, things that are being added, it's just what He's putting in my heart as I'm sharing, and a lot of it I've realized too that over the years that as I submit myself to the Lord to be a mouthpiece and an instrument, that there's those that are out there listening that you've had questions to God, prayer to God, or just things that you've asked about, and He'll take a willing vessel and use that to speak to whatever that is. So I pray that as we continue to go through this time, that He continues to speak to me, to us, and to continue to be the great God He is, to continue to draw us to Him and have a deeper knowledge of who He is and an intimate relationship with Him. Environment first. currently, I do a lot at the Pickle Research Center at UT, a lot with facilities and how to involve facilities that are new or being renovated. And so I kind of use this example already as a place of what you have to think about before something was created. So I'm going to skip that one for now. Tested for completeness. So testing can be thought of in various ways, but there's a parable in Luke that says that when the word goes forth, that some of it falls on good ground, some on rocky ground. The rocky ground says those that on the rocky ground are those ones who receive the word of joy when they hear it, but they have no root. They believe for a while, but then in the time of testing, they fall away. So that there's times of testing of what we hear, what we've been given, of, okay, how's that going to be used? And then even as we hear and are taught and learn about God and who He is, that the Holy Spirit brings things back to our remembrance of various things. And there's, for me, I've always been more of a energetic type A person, have lists, enjoy checking things off. And years ago, I didn't realize that was giving me quite a bit of anxiety. And I didn't realize that from doing that, I was enjoying it, but at the same time, it was detrimental to the anxiousness that I was experiencing. And so years ago, I had one transition of, okay, I'm going to write it down, even I'm about to go to bed at night, and I'm thinking, okay, I can do this, and I forget about that, I can do this tomorrow, to just say, as Jesus said in the boat, peace, be still. And then just for me to say, okay, God, if this is something you call me to do, I'm going to trust that you're going to bring it back to my remembrance tomorrow or when it's time for it to be done, and not for me to have to keep up with every little dotting every I and crossing every T. And first I was thinking that that's irresponsible, but then in the design that He made me for, there's certain burdens that He didn't call for us to carry, but in the design He said, well, give them to me. It's like, well, what does that look like? Well, this is one example that He told me that this is what this looks like. You don't have to worry about your to-do list. Give it to me, and I'll lead you on how to do it. So, getting back here. Times of testing. So by faith, Abraham was tested. So Abraham was tested in a way that God said, I'm going to give you a son. You're really old, but I'm going to do it anyway. And God did it. And then God says, okay, now sacrifice him. And then even as Abraham was about to go up to sacrifice him, the son said, we have the wood, but where's the sacrifice? And then Abraham said, God will provide the sacrifice. At the time, the way the scripture's written, Abraham didn't know, but then as he continued, he was tested of, okay, God promised you something that seemed impossible. He gave it to you. And then once He gives it to you, if He says, give it back to me, how willing are we to do that? My kids sometimes, if I give them something they really want, and I say, can I have some? They're like, no, when they were younger. And so, and for us even too, that in that testing, it's like, well, to me it's not a test of sort of pass fail, but more of a test of I know you love me. God saying to us, I know you love me. I want you to know how much you love me. I want you to show yourself how much you love me. And so going through times of testing of things that He calls us to do, that's part of who He is and part of His design for us in our lives. And even there's various other examples of being tested. Being tested for completeness, Jesus was tested in the wilderness. There's an account there. Some of these slides I'm going to talk more on, some I'm going to sort of move through. One of these examples for testing, when I was in teaching engineering, I would take a lot of the students on engineering trips to see different companies and what they do, what they design, what they build, what they test, what they produce. And at one company at Dell, they have these rugged computers, and so when we go there, they show what they do for testing. And so they have these drop tests, where they have to leave it a certain amount of time and then drop it. So they've already designed it to withstand that, but then they continue to do it so that it proves to them that what they designed, what they built, that it stands the test of what they needed it to do. They take it through sandblasting, they take it through temperature testing, they take it through a machine that just opens and closes that machine just thousands of times. And they continue to do that until it fails, because they want to know when it fails. But they already know how many times it was designed to do that. And so even for us, as God designed us, built us, created us, takes us through testing, like he won't, there's a concept that he has that he won't put us through more than what we can bear. So he knows what our breaking limit is. And sometimes, even now, there's probably some of us that are going through things that we're like, I don't know how I'm going to make it through this, Lord. Well, he knows what our limit is. And so going through that, we may see it as testing of, well, am I going to fail? He sees it as, I'm testing what I'm putting you in a way that I want you to see how great I am in your weakness. And so he does that through us as the ultimate designer, builder, and tester. For me, I'll share about one of these that for testing. When I was so now I'm speaking, and God uses me to speak in various ways, and then even when He called me to be a pastor, I was like, well, I don't want to be a preacher, but I can do the Psalms 23 thing. I can lead people to still waters and green pastures, and I can do that. But the speaking thing, I don't like the way my voice sounds. I don't like the rhythm of it. Sometimes words get jumbled. I can do numbers just really easily, but words not as smoothly. But then when I was in elementary school, I had such a severe speech impediment that my family couldn't understand what I was saying, and words would come out jumbled. I wasn't aware of what was happening. I had to go through years of speech class and just struggling through learning how to spell, learning how to speak. And part of it was my mind was going so fast that I wasn't listening to what I was saying. In my head, it was but then it was coming out, to where I needed to slow down and do that. And part of that too, I see in hindsight that it was some things that were anxiousness and other things, to where God's peace would eventually bring a calmness to that. But if I was growing up, I was thinking, well, I can't speak at all. But to me, God was, it reminds me of, in the Bible, oftentimes He would call someone to do something and they feel like they can't do it. For me, I felt like, well, I can't do it. But then He designed me, He built me, and He sent me through that to me, that test of, you're going to struggle through this, but I've still called you to do this. And so in that, I believe that there's things that some of you even now or have struggled through things and will, but don't take that struggle as Him not calling you to do what He's called you to do. Take it as He knows your design, He knows what He created you for, He knows what He's testing you through, and it all that we're wonderfully made, and we're made for His purpose and for His glory. That he molded us like clay, is what was in Job. In Psalms, that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. So being not just made, but being like reverently made, and reverently and wonderfully made. That oftentimes we look at God's design for us, and we may look in a mirror and go, God, I don't like my ears. I don't like my graying hair. I don't like my nose. I don't like different things about me. But then if I look back and I kind of look at what am I thinking, it's like I'm judging God's wonderful creation through a lens of what I'm picking up in the world. Say So I have to often seek God for, God, let me see me as you see me, as you created me. The me that you created before the foundations of the earth, that you designed, and that as I see that me, let me love that me as you love that me. And so even as we look at ourselves, even as we change throughout time, as we go through puberty and we get larger, we get older and we may get slower or various changes, that we're still wonderfully made. That wonderfully made doesn't go away because we go through changes, that it's still there. And it's for us to not get set in what that wonderfully made means, but to go to God and say, God, what does it mean when you say that I'm wonderfully made? Not what does television say, what does my family say, what does society say, but what does the ultimate designer, creator say? And I'll just read this one from Philippians 2:13. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. So there's his good purpose that we're called to fulfill. For time, I'm going to move through some things. Thinking about structures, biblically, there's various structures that were in the Bible and how to do them. Noah's Ark, reading through of what the dimensions are, what things are supposed to be, the tabernacle, the materials, giving people the gifts and talents to be able to make the gold, to make whatever needed to go in the tabernacle. And so biblically, but then also God created his creation to make beautiful structures and wonderful structures. That even in, like the honeybee, for the hexagon structure, it's the most space with the least amount of material. So I don't see honeybees kind of going and go, let's calculate this and get the slide rule out and the abacus out. But God put that in them to be able to do that. Beaver structures with even having like pressure relief areas with what they build, having underwater access, that God put that in them to be able to just be natural builders. For ants, I've always been intrigued, but then there's been studies done that we put some in water and then they make a raft of themselves to help protect and do what they need to do. That they make bridges to be able to cross a particular area from themselves. And their homes, if you see cross sections, are there as a aluminum casting of a ant home structure that it can get very intricate. And so God put that in them to be natural design, just builders. Just in flight, there's things that we mimic in making planes that fly and observing God's creation that we learn from in engineering. So when we learn, we sort of have to reverse engineer what we see, and then from there, we are able to create things that we enjoy and also other people can enjoy to make life better. Biomimicry is some of you have probably heard about, of just looking at nature systems for inspiration and what we create. So a few examples of those. For the hummingbird, that there are little autonomous micro helicopters that are being made from studying the hummingbird and how the wings fly and how they can just stay still, get nectar from a plant and move around. So that's an example. There's researchers that are looking at seagulls and how they are able to fly, and then creating a device that could hover, dive, and climb rapidly like a seagull can. So by looking at God's original design for that. The dragonfly, that there's drones that are being made from looking at the dragonfly and how they can move, their efficiency. NASA making things that are in 2034, expecting to have some probe the surface of Saturn's moon by using a autonomous powered craft that's inspired by the dragonfly. Velcro. So a lot of you probably heard the fun Velcro of how it was created, that someone noticed that there were birds that were sticking to their dog and also to their pants, and it's like, hey, well, what is this hook system, loop and hook system, and then created Velcro. So that's from learning from what God designed and created. The bullet train, looking at the front of a kingfisher's beak, and then engineered, inspired to make improvements on the bullet train. Fireflies, inspired to make LEDs, just the way that initially LEDs weren't as efficient, and then looking at the firefly and studying how God created the firefly and the light that comes in the firefly, and then even just thinking now that he made light, and then from there, by studying, we were able to get the LED, and then now LEDs in more and more, they last a lot longer time, but they're more prevalent in what's being done. So for me personally, even in our home, like about a couple of years ago, taking fluorescents and then changing them out to LEDs to where it was quicker, it was just a lot more efficient, and then they last for like years and years and years without having to change the bulb. So something that we benefit from. Tires and shoes. So in the early 1900s, a person looking at their dog's feet and how the grooves were, and studying that, and looking at God's design for a dog's paw, and then you get developments for shoes and for tires. And even for sound, for our eardrum, Alexander Graham Bell making his first shots at the speaker, the microphone, those type of devices, of looking at the eardrum and how the eardrum works, and then his first devices modeled that, and then went on from there. Again, from God's design. And then just to remember that we build on Christ's foundation, that we're to build on the foundation of Christ. So in 1 Corinthians 15:10, and that, well, 1 Corinthians 15, just saying that there's various things we can build our life upon, but if we don't build it on the foundation of Christ, then it's not going to last. And so that's the foundation that we're to, when we are thinking about planning and designing, whether it's an engineering product, or whether it's our lives, or whatever it is, that building on that foundation of Christ, that is the rock that will stand. Some thoughts on takeaways, that as I was going through it, just things that that came to me as I was thinking, and I thought I think this would be good just to share this as just thoughts, takeaway thoughts. That God created, we replicate, manage. He called us to multiply, to subdue the earth. That's part of that replication. So we do that, and we even replicate. What's kind of hit me now is that God sent His Son to die for us on the cross, and to be rose again for our sins, and be reconciled to Him. And so He was the author of all that. Our job is to lead others to Christ. God had in the Trinity to have a Christ to do what had to be done to lead us to Him, and our job is to lead others to Him. And sometimes in our lives and in our professions, that's leading others to us. And as the Apostle Paul said in the New Testament, follow me as I follow Christ. That they follow us first, they get to know us, and then from there they get to know God. Or sometimes I know some of us probably have had conversations where they may say, "Wow, that's a really stressful situation. how are you able to handle that? Or notice that someone in your family just passed away, how are you able to still be functional or have joy or have peace? And then, to me, that always looks like just an open door for God for us to share. Well, that's God. That's part of my relationship with God. He gives me the grace to go through it. He gives me this, and so to lead others to us, and then also that leading others in our actions and what we do and what we don't do, and what we say and in what we don't say. That God created light. We manage light, as in like the light in this room, or for lasers that, and in our lives we're light to others. So he says that we're a light to the world, and that for a light you don't put it on a bushel to be hidden. We're lights to be able to shine, and that in that shining, that we attract others to us. But also, as we've noticed in the world we've always lived in, but just more intense now, that light attracts good things, and light also attracts pests. Light attracts things that are not as desirable, but still we're called to attract and be light to others. And also about light, something that I feel to share now as well is that some people are attracted to light, but then it's an irritant. So if you or if I'm sleeping and the lights are off and then someone just turns the light on, I'm not saying thank you for making it go from exactly darkness to light. I'm like, turn the light off, or what are you doing? Because it's irritating if someone is in darkness, and if you are walking in a light of Christ, Christ's light is shining through you, to expect that that's going to initially at least irritate someone that's been in darkness. So not to be surprised, but to know that God can give the grace for them to get used to it, or to grow to Him, but that's something that is there. And also some insects, when light comes, they run away, and that happens as well. Okay, another takeaway thought. He is creator. As He does, we do. So we're in His image, and we lead others to do. So as we are, I believe it was, once we've been converted, that we go and strengthen our brethren, or our sisterin. So we go and lead others to who Christ is, and to His love, and to His deliverance, to reconciliation. So He planted trees to produce fruit. That was part of His plan. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, you need a chicken to be able to lay the egg, and then you continue to have that we're planted. Was there? Oh, I thought that someone had something. We're planted to produce fruit, and whether that's planted in this particular generation, this time period, planted in the particular building that you go to for work, planted in your neighborhood, planted in our particular house, our family. Holidays are coming up, so Christmas time. So all of us probably have family members that we just love to be around. We have family members that we're like, okay, God, give me the grace to be able to deal with them for this day or this visit that they'll be here. But that we're planted to produce fruit. And then rest, that God needed rest. It was, biblically, is not a suggestion, it's a commandment, that it's to rest. He modeled it, that He created and He rested. Boundaries are part of the plan, that we have boundaries. We don't have a limited time, unlimited energy, that in a day, that there's a time for when we need to follow God to say, okay, when is the day's done? When is done? There's always going to be more to do. And yeah, there's always going to be more to do. Honoring God. So, and sort of wrapping up here, that there have been scientists who have honored God. They give honor and they give honor to God, and they acknowledge God for giving them what they invented or what they were a part of. And then in honoring God, there's certain scriptures that talk about honoring God. So honor Him with our wealth and our first fruits. That in Samuel, he mentioned that the concept of honoring me, I will honor. And so there's benefits to honoring God. And then in the NIV, it says to revere Christ, but in some translations, it says to honor Christ as Lord. So a few scientists, there's many. George Washington Carver, he said, "The Lord has guided me, and without my Savior, I am nothing." And so he had hundreds and hundreds of inventions, peanut butter, cosmetics, paint, oil, marble, plywood, dye used, and crayons. And he accredited what he did to God. For the laser printer, said God put things in us as tool developers and creative individuals, and I think it has to please him when he sees us as those faculties to make something completely new. And so, again, giving God honor for what's done. And there was an award winner person that created a marinated steak in the 90s that took 20 years to develop. And I guess one thing that stands out to me about that is patience, is that sometimes we get inspiration from God to do something, and we say, oh, that should take about a year or two, and then it's like 10 or 20 or 25, 30, but that know that God's faithful, so to be patient. And she said, I don't have a cookbook. She said, God gives me my own. Prayer is, when I get 99%, prayer is where I get 99% of my recipes. And so even just no matter where we are, to be open for God giving us direction, God leading us. And so I think one question I'll just leave with us before I open it up for questions and conversation is how will you honor God with your gifts, with your talents, and with your life? How will I continue to honor him with my gifts, with my talents, with my life? Thank you.
So, two-part question. First is, you mentioned 1998, you rededicated your life.
Yes.
I'd be curious to know what led to that.
Okay.
And then the second part of that is, how often at a university like UT, very liberal, are you actually able to share your faith, especially in the engineering department?
Yes.
What is that environment like?
Good questions. So in 1998, what led to that, I had gone through 3 years of just darkness and lots of bad decisions. There were 2 car accidents where the car was totaled I shouldn't have walked away from. Spiritual warfare going on. My relationships just being in shambles. I stopped going to church, stopped hanging around Christian friends and family, stopped listening to Christian music. And I was trying to do life on my own and say, well, I know what to do, I'm going to do it. And got to the point to where I was like, I'm depressed, I don't want to live anymore, I don't know what to do. And okay, God, I need you. And so it was a surrender of, I knew I needed something. And even in that, the way God turned that switch for me, I could talk about the experience of it, is that I was seeking him, I was surrendering, but I couldn't change me. So beforehand, I would think, well, you think happy thoughts, you'll be fine. You pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, you make your own way. I was in a place to where I couldn't make my own way. I couldn't do, and I was humbled. And I knew that I couldn't do it. And I knew that if it was going to be done, it was going to be God, or it was going to be nothing. I was going to just be there. So I was driving in my car, and even as I was driving in my car, and I wasn't aware of Christian radio or before then, but I had found a Christian radio station. I was driving, and there was a song. It was some of you remember it was Stephen Curtis Chapman's song, and it's called "Free." And as in the end, and it's a song that's longer than normal songs, but it kept saying, if the Son has set you free, then you are free indeed. If the Son has set you free, you are free indeed. And it's like, to me, it was like, that's a lot of times to keep saying that same thing over and over again. But as I was driving, something just hit me. It was like, tears, it seemed like the sky got brighter. It was different. And from then, even hearing Christmas songs, it was more than just a nice song. It was like, yeah, joy to the world, the Lord has come. I mean, it was something that I had experience with the Lord that couldn't take that away. And going through what I went through, those 3 years were very terrible. But then during that time, there were a few things that were brought to pass. One, it gave me compassion for people that I hadn't had before, because I was pretty just into me and just me. And so it gave me that. It gave me, I'll call it a stickiness to the Lord that I didn't have. I was raised in the church. I was kind of lukewarm. I was doing the right things just not to get in trouble, not because I really was following the Lord or seeking Him or submitted to Him. And then went to being just totally away. And then it's like, well, now I'm not leaving. I'm stuck. I'm all in. And within 6 months of me being all in 1998, I resigned from my engineering job. Within 6 months of that, I resigned. Within 6 months of that, a ministry called Praise in the Park started doing ministry outreaches through parks in the Austin area. And within 6 months of there, met my wife and got to know her through citywide ministry things. And then it was just a different change. And I didn't know how even life was going to be after that, because the corporate-minded folks in my family is like, well, you're going to leave your job at this company and you're making this. What about your 401k? What about this? What about that? I was like, all I know is that this is not what I'm called to do. I don't know what it is, but I'm stepping out. And that was 24 years ago. And there were times where I think a lot of things that I had got for myself, things that God had let those things drop, and He restarted to where all that He had started doing for me and giving me, I was able to acknowledge Him for it, and it was built on a different foundation than what things that were built on before. So that was part of that story. And then one thing I'll mention too, that this happens for different people in different ways, but for during that time in the 90s, I had a 2 or 3 year issue with with alcohol, and it was numbing. It was kind of getting my mind off of what I was going through. But after that experience of in the car and then kind of saying, okay, God did what He did, I didn't have a desire for it anymore. And that was like, okay, that's God. It's like I didn't do that. I didn't even see it coming. I knew I had a desire to have something change, but that was what He did for that. And then just like there were different things that He did in my life in different ways, and it was Him that did it. He showed Himself in my life in various ways. So to me, just like as Christ healed folks, some people He put mud in their eyes, some people when He just touched them, it was just various ways. But so my life was various things happening in various ways, but that was one that just kind of stood out. And then at UT, I was at UT 20 years ago when I left my job at that corporate job in semiconductors. When I was going to leave, I didn't know what was going to happen next, but someone at UT said, hey, there's this position dealing with educational outreach and math and science, and I think you'd be good for it. And I was already doing some outreaches in the city with math and science things, and I was concerned about the finances of things. I was like, well, that's going to be a big pay cut. But then God's hand was in there too, to where it started off as being a lot lower, but then there were different reasons that people said things that made it higher, but I saw that was just God's providence of Him being faithful and saying, no, I've called you to do this, I'll take care of you. And so I was part of the Christian faculty network back then, and then there was like Campus Renewal was doing a lot of things in the early 2000s, and Res Week when they had the tent outside of Gregory Gym, and then doing the Harp and Bowl prayer sessions. I would take some of those and lead guitar worship and that. So it was different then. I left and then came back 4 years ago, and I'm at UT again. I'm on Pickle campus, but then I'm at UT, and it is a different environment. And for me, it's being wise, not being pushy, not being fearful, but being wise. Even before 4 years ago, like in the 2012 through 18 era, I was teaching in the public school system. And so there, some of it, the atmosphere depended on what was happening in the nation or in the state or in the city. But then some of it was also who the principal was of the school. So there was 3 different schools that I was a part of, and initially I saw it as, well, I just need to do something. I felt called to do it, and there's other reasons, another testimony as to where that happened. But when I was at every school I was sent to, after a few years, I had to really see it as, I'm an ambassador for Christ, and this is my mission field. And so the students there that were Christian, I saw it as my call to support them to reach their peers. So it wasn't for me to use that as a pulpit. It was for me to strengthen the other Christian students that were there, to let them know about See at the Pole and make sure that they got the word out to their student faculty. Make sure that those that were interested in athletics, that Fellowship of Christian Athletes, FCA, was involved for getting Young Life into the school. And so it was, and then also me as a faculty staff person there was, okay, let's get the other Christian faculty that from time to time you kind of knew who they were, together to pray for one another and pray for the school and pray for the campus. And so some places it was a little more dangerous for persecution and for pushback. And with all of it, just had to be wise of, okay, well, when we did it, where we did it, not being hiding from it, but then not publicizing it in a way that is just saying, well, we're just looking for conflict. So currently it's me being me, and just praying for God to have a window open for conversations. And even as a supervisor, people know where I am, but then there's times when someone has a problem and they'll come and ask me, and then they'll go, okay, that's God helping in the store for me to share how having a deeper relationship with God may help in their life, in this situation, and in general.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I think right here in front.
Bill?
Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I enjoyed it tremendously.
Yes.
In particular, your last question.
Yes.
How will you honor God?
Yes.
I raise this because there is something I feel that God has placed on my heart, but every effort in that direction has just resulted in delays, frustration, and failures. And so part of my question is, how in fact do I know that this is God's purpose for my life? I pray and I get silence. So I'm thinking, well, is this a time of learning, like Moses had to spend time with Jethro before he knew how to lead? Is it time of testing, like with Abraham? Is it time of that it's just God's timing? Noah's floating in a cork for months with no rudder and no sail. Is it a case of I have strayed from God's path, sort of the spiritual equivalent of hold my beer, I got this from God? Is it demonic, or worse of all, that God may have designed my life as a cautionary example to others?
Yeah.
So how do I, in the time of silence, know my design purpose from God?
Good question, and I'll give this brief answer, and then we can talk more offline if you desire. For me, what God's led me to in that is It's a acrostic of will, W-I-L-L. So it's like what's naturally happening, what's the, identify the desire of my heart, listen to wise counsel, and listen to God. So what's naturally happening. So it says acknowledge God in all your ways, and he'll give you the, if you acknowledge him in all your ways, then he'll direct your paths. And so for me, more recently, I've been taking that as that's a promise. Okay, I'm acknowledging him. So whether I see me being directed by him or not, as I continue to acknowledge him, that he's going to direct me. Identify the desires of your heart. So commit your ways unto the Lord, and he'll give you the desires of your heart. So as you commit your way to him, then continue to say, okay, God, what's the desire that you placed in my heart? There's wisdom in the multitude of counsel. So listening to wise counsel of others. So having a pastor, even someone that you sort of submit to spiritually to seek from, and then also someone that you kind of walk with to hold you accountable through life. So another Christian or two that you know love you and loves God, and that they know you and know God, and that those folks are good folks to ask, hey, this is what's happening, can you pray with me, and then let me know what you hear, or this is what I think I'm hearing, what's going on, and then just listening to God, so listen to the Holy Spirit and saying, speak to me. And those four, to me at least, one of those I'm always aware of generally. And for me, just what's naturally happening of what are people naturally saying to me or asking me about? What's naturally standing out to me as I watch television or drive throughout the city? What are you making attractive to me? I believe, just like in science, that he uses attraction to fulfill his purpose. So he has electrons attracted to holes. He has negative attracted to positive. Magnetic poles attractive. Even within relationships, that there's an attraction between male and female. So there's attraction that he uses. And so, okay, God, what are you attracting me to right now? Are you attracting me more to spend more time with you? Are you attracting me more to get more involved in the local church or less involved in the local church? So, that's what I would say. Yes.
Dr. Bell, your message is tremendous. Appreciate your testimony. One, I think, beautiful part of your story is your reference to your experience with alcoholism and coming out of that.
Yeah.
I'm curious, did you have an epiphany? Was there a hit bottom experience, or for you to pull out from that existence, or was it kind of a gradual? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Yes. So at that time, alcoholism was one of many issues. So for that one, I would say when I was in undergrad school, I was a part of a secular fraternity. Drinking was a part of it, and I wasn't a part of it because I was like, I'm not a drinker. When I got to the point of, I guess the point of, I want to say this beforehand, it's like throwing stones of like, sometimes we say, well, how can that person do that? I would never do that. So I was kind of like, well, how can somebody just kind of be on alcohol and just kind of do that? It's like, why would somebody want to do that? So being judgmental and all that. So got to the point to where I was down enough, and then the people that were around me was like, hey, well, try this. Try a cooler. Okay, well, now try a cooler mixed with this. Now try this mixed with that. Now try this. And so it got just further and further. And I guess similar to like, I could see like with David and Bathsheba, it's like you just kind of continue to go down that path, and you're not even realizing what's happening until Samuel came to him and said, well, you're that man that did this. And they say, oh, I'm so sorry. So for me, for the alcohol deal, I knew that I had to make a change, and it was when I was having desires of thoughts of, well, is this life even worth living anymore? It's like, well, I could probably drink this and this and this, and so those thoughts were gone, and then someone called me that was in my life but never calls. I mean, if I call them, if they're available, they'll answer the phone. But they never would call me. They called me right then as I was about to just think about pouring some and drinking, and they said, "So what are you doing?" I was like, "Well, I'm about to do such and such." They said, "Don't do that, don't do that." And I was thinking, "You're right. I don't think I." And I was like, "Okay, there's some other." Looking back, there was other spiritual influences that were happening there that I was being guided by and being blinded by, and I think when it hit, all I can say is that the taste went away. I just didn't have the taste anymore. Now, there were some issues, there were some lust issues that did not just go away that way. Some of those seeds that were planted when I was younger and then kind of fighting through took majority of my life to be at a state of freedom from some of the lust issues. So one thing just went away just the next day. I didn't have the taste for it, and one was a battle and a fight. And I see in both of those, looking back generationally, I guess two things generationally and family-wise, but also generationally in the church is what Satan uses to get Christians astray who are going for him and taking territory for him. And then within family life, it's what's gotten astray from just habits and then just for generation that God deals with generations. So when he talks about so-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so. So that's the answer.
Thank you.
Yes.
Last question here, Greg?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Bell, for
Yeah.
coming. I'm curious as to what your current research interests are.
Okay.
And how what you shared with us impacted your decision to work in those spaces.
Okay. Current research interest. I've always been interested in robotics and control systems. So that's one. I'm sort of being more involved in like RF communications, radio frequency communications, and I would say more, and then systems engineering. So systems that integrate electrical, mechanical, software to solve certain problems and certain tasking. So, and for this presentation, just the whole design process. So I like designing, and even when I was teaching engineering, what I enjoyed the most was various ways of getting students to brainstorm about coming up with ideas and to design, to have a great design. And then the building part of it, some people had good skills and giftings to build and just knack for it. Some had to think more through it. The testing, I've always enjoyed just going through testing. So there's a curriculum called Master Builder that my wife and I wrote that's for middle and high school students. And through the testing part of it, you build different things that are what's the fastest, what's the strongest, what's the slowest. And as you test those things, you take data from it and then learn how to, like a lot of students ask, and kids ask, my kids ask, well, why am I learning this? What am I ever going to use it for? And so kind of saying, well, if you think of a building and then you take it down to using paper and popsicle sticks or whatever you use to build this for, and then you're looking at making it the strongest or the tallest or the fastest, what do you have to test for that? And then, okay, well, that's what has to be tested for when the real thing is made. And then, to me, that's, okay, God just is one word, just in his awesomeness, but in his omnipresence, omnipotency, he designs us for what the design is perfect and there already. And so, and we'll say, well, God, you gave me this gift of being able to do this, or this joy of being able to do this. What am I ever going to use that for? Or I had this job for 5 years, what was the purpose of that? Or I lived here for 10 years, what was the purpose of that? And then like I would tell my kids when they were, especially when they were younger, it's like, well, my grandparents would say, well, just keep on living, and then you'll know. But I think oftentimes God communicates to me in that way. Well, just keep on walking with me, and you'll see what that purpose is for that. So.
Awesome,
Okay.
thank you. Any chance you'd be willing to help us as a chapter to design a robot to enter into the battle box?
That could be fun.
It would be fun. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.